There is a sound you cannot forget. It lives somewhere between your ribs and your spine, coiled tight like a spring that never quite releases. The crash of ceramic against tile. The slam of a door so violent it rattles the frame. The heavy footsteps ascending stairs, each one a countdown to something you cannot name but already know. And then the voice, sharp, jagged, tearing through the quiet, like fabric ripping in slow motion. Your body remembers before your mind catches up. Your heart accelerates a frantic drumbeat against your chest. Your stomach clenches into a fist. Your breath becomes shallow, trapped somewhere in your throat, as if breathing too loudly might draw attention, might make you visible, might make you the target. You want to disappear. You want to fold yourself into the smallest possible shape and slide beneath the bed, into the closet, anywhere. The sound cannot reach you. This is not a scene from a horror film. This is Tuesday dinner. This is Saturday morning. This is the texture of your childhood, the wallpaper of your earliest memories. And now, decades later, you live alone. You have escaped. You have built a life with walls that do not shake, with doors that close softly, with voices that stay level and measured. But the escape was only physical. The sound still lives inside you. When a colleague raises their voice in excitement, your nervous system does not hear excitement. It hears threat. Your muscles tense. Your vision narrows. You are 8 years old again, calculating exit routes, measuring distances to safety. When your supervisor calls you into their office, your first thought is not curiosity. It is certainty. You must have done something wrong. You are about to be punished. You deserve whatever is coming, because you have always been the problem, haven't you? The thing that tips the scale from calm to chaos. You have learned to manage the anxiety. You smile. You apologize for things that are not your fault. You work harder than anyone else, stay later, volunteer first, because somewhere in the architecture of your nervous system, there is a belief carved in stone. If everyone around you is happy, you will be safe. If you can just keep the peace, keep the mood light, keep everyone pleased, then the shouting will not start. The volcano will not erupt. The world will not split open beneath your feet. Growing up around anger is like living next to an active volcano. You never know when the eruption will come. You only know that it will. And so, you learn to read the tremors, to study the smoke, to become an expert in seismic activity. You learn to live in a constant state of almost. You have spent your entire life believing you are simply anxious, that you were born this way, wired wrong, built with faulty circuits that make you too sensitive, too careful, too afraid. You tell people you are introverted when they ask why you go quiet in groups. You say you are shy when what you mean is, I am scanning every face for micro-expressions of displeasure. You describe yourself as a people pleaser, as if it is a personality quirk, something charming and harmless, when the truth is far less gentle. The truth is this: you are not anxious by nature. You are a survivor of something that had no name, no visible bruises, no evidence that anyone would recognize as trauma. You grew up in a war zone where the bombs were made of words and the shrapnel was silence. And what you call your personality is actually a collection of survival strategies so deeply embedded that you can no longer tell where the threat ended and you began. That thing you do, the constant reading of rooms, the obsessive attention to tone of voice, the way you can detect the slightest shift in someone's energy before they have even fully entered a space. This is not intuition. This is threat detection. Your brain was trained day after day, year after year, to function as a radar system, scanning for danger, calculating probabilities, preparing escape routes. You learn to read faces the way a meteorologist reads storm patterns, searching for the small signs that predict the coming devastation. And you are so good at it now. You can walk into a room and within seconds know who is upset, who is pretending, who is about to snap. You absorb the emotional atmosphere like a sponge, soaking up every drop of tension, every particle of unspoken anger, until you are drenched in feelings that do not even belong to you. People call you empathetic. They say you are so good at reading others, so emotionally intelligent, so sensitive to their needs. But they do not understand the cost. They do not know that this skill was not a gift you were born with, but a talent forged in the fires of necessity. You learn to read emotions because your safety depended on it. Because if you could predict the explosion, you might be able to prevent it, or at least you might be able to hide. And so, you became the adjuster, the peacekeeper, the one who makes everyone else comfortable at the expense of your own nervous system. You walk into a tense room and immediately start performing emotional labor, cracking jokes, asking questions, smoothing over awkward silences, doing anything to shift the energy to lighten the load, to keep the anger from surfacing. You thought this made you weak. You thought your inability to handle conflict, your desperate need for harmony, your physical reaction to raised voices, you thought all of this meant something was wrong with you. But here is what no one told you. Your nervous system is not broken. It is burned out. It has been flooded with stress hormones for so many years that it no longer knows how to return to baseline. You are not weak. You are a miracle. The fact that you survived that, you are still standing, still searching for healing, still trying to understand this, is not weakness. This is extraordinary strength, wearing the disguise of anxiety. You learn to walk without sound, to move through the house like a ghost, your footsteps barely disturbing the air, your presence a whisper rather than a declaration. You learn to close doors with such careful precision that the latch would click into place without even the smallest noise. You learn to speak in a voice perpetually turned down, as if volume itself was a form of violence, a provocation, a match struck near gasoline. This is what it means to walk on eggshells. You live without weight, without substance, without the right to take up space. Every movement is calculated. Every word is measured 3 times before it leaves your mouth. Every request is swallowed, every need postponed, every desire edited down to nothing, because you have learned the fundamental equation of your childhood. Your existence is the problem, your needs are the trigger, your voice is the spark that lights the fuse. And so, you learn to disappear while still remaining visible. You learn to be present without being present. You perfect the art of invisible survival. There is a logic to this, a child's logic, that makes perfect sense when you are small and powerless. If you are very good, very quiet, very careful, then maybe the anger will not come. If you can control your behavior perfectly enough, you can control their emotions. If you do not ask for too much, do not make too much noise, do not cry or complain or need anything at all, then the shouting will stop. The doors will stop slamming. The air will stop vibrating with rage. This is the terrible mathematics you learned. You believed you had power over their anger. And in believing this, you also accepted the corollary that when they did explode, it was because you failed. You were not good enough, not quiet enough, not perfect enough. The anger was your fault. You caused it. You deserved it. But here is what no one tells a child living in this kind of chaos. You never had that power. Their anger was never about you. It was about their own inability to regulate emotion, their own unhealed wounds, their own lack of skills to manage the ordinary frustrations of being human. You were simply the most convenient target, the safest one to hurt, the one who could not leave. While you were learning to walk on eggshells, your brain was undergoing a transformation. Deep in the center of your skull, a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala was growing larger, becoming more active, more sensitive, more attuned to threat than the amygdala of a child raised in calm. This is the part of your brain responsible for detecting danger, for triggering the alarm system that floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol, preparing you to fight or flee or freeze. In a healthy environment, the amygdala activates when there is real danger, a car swerving into your lane, a stranger following too closely in a dark parking lot. But your amygdala learned to sound the alarm for everything, a furrowed brow, a sigh, a door closing just slightly harder than usual, a moment of silence that lasts 2 seconds too long. Your nervous system learned that anything could be the precursor to an explosion, and so it began treating everything as a potential threat. This is hypervigilance. This is what it means to live with the alarm, always ringing the red lights, always flashing the evacuation sirens, always wailing in the background of your consciousness. You are exhausted because your brain is running a surveillance operation 24 hours a day, burning through energy at an unsustainable rate, leaving you depleted and foggy and unable to focus on anything that is not an immediate threat. You notice everything. The slight change in someone's tone between one sentence and the next. The microscopic tightening around their eyes, the way they hold their jaw, the rhythm of their breathing. You have become an expert in reading micro-expressions, those tiny flashes of emotion that cross a face in less than a second. This skill would be impressive if it was not so utterly draining. If it did not mean that you cannot relax, cannot stop scanning, cannot ever truly believe that you are safe. And this hypervigilance connects directly to another survival strategy you develop to the desperate compulsive need to make everyone around you happy. Psychologists call this the fawn response, one of the 4 survival strategies alongside fight, flight, and freeze. When you cannot fight back against someone more powerful, when you cannot run away when freezing makes you more visible, you learn to appease, to please, to become so agreeable, so helpful, so perfectly attuned to the needs of others that they will have no reason to hurt you. You learn this equation early. Their happiness equals your safety. And so, you became a professional peacekeeper, an emotional acrobat, bending yourself into whatever shape the moment required. You learned to laugh at jokes that were not funny, to agree with opinions you did not hold, to volunteer for tasks you did not want to do, all in service of keeping the emotional temperature stable, keeping everyone comfortable, keeping the anger at bay. You became someone who apologizes reflexively, instinctively, even when you have done nothing wrong. Someone steps on your foot and you say sorry. Someone interrupts you mid-sentence and you apologize for speaking. Someone criticizes your work unfairly, and you thank them for the feedback, already crafting ways to be better, to fix yourself, to ensure they will not be displeased again. This is not kindness. This is survival masquerading as virtue. But there is something else that happens when you grow up surrounded by uncontrolled rage. Something that splits you into 2 possible futures, 2 different versions of the same wound. Some of you become the anger. You swore you would never be like them, but then one day you hear yourself shouting, and the voice is not yours. It is theirs, coming out of your mouth using your vocal cords. You slam a door and feel sick with recognition. You see fear flash across someone's face and realize with horror that you are the volcano now. You have internalized the pattern so completely that under stress, under pressure, when your own emotions become too overwhelming to contain you, repeat exactly what was done to you. You learned anger as a language, and now it is the only fluent tongue you speak when the world becomes too much. Or you go the opposite direction. You decide with every fiber of your being that you will never ever become them. You will be different. You will be calm. You will be kind. You will swallow your anger until it dissolves, bury it so deep that no one will ever see. It never allow yourself even a moment of justified rage, because rage is what monsters feel, and you refuse to be a monster. And so, you let people walk over you. You accept mistreatment with a smile. You allow boundaries to be violated because setting a boundary feels aggressive, feels mean, feels too close to anger. You would rather be hurt than risk hurting anyone else. You would rather disappear entirely than ever make someone feel the way you were made to feel. Both of these paths lead to the same destination, a life where you are not fully yourself, where anger, which is just information, just a signal that a boundary has been crossed or a need has been ignored, becomes either a weapon or a forbidden emotion. Neither version of you gets to experience anger as something neutral, something human, something that can be expressed without destruction. And then there is the silence. The thing that sometimes felt worse than the shouting, because after the storm came the cold, the withdrawal, the silent treatment that lasted for hours, sometimes days, where you were invisible, not because you chose to be, but because you were being erased, where every attempt at connection was met with turned backs, with refused eye contact, with responses so clipped and cold that they felt like physical blows. The silence taught you that love is conditional, that it can be withdrawn at any moment, that you are always one mistake away from being abandoned, even while still living in the same house, breathing the same air. The silence was its own form of violence, a punishment that left no marks but carved out pieces of your sense of belonging, your sense of worth, your belief that you could be loved, even when you were imperfect. You learned that conflict does not end with resolution. It ends with exile. There is a truth that should have been spoken to you when you were small, when you first began to believe that you were the cause of the chaos. A truth that no one said because the adults around you were too consumed by their own storms to see the child caught in the wreckage. The anger was never about you, not your behavior, not your needs, not your imperfections or your mistakes or the ordinary messiness of being a child. The rage that filled your home like smoke, that turned the air thick and unbreathable, that made every day feel like walking through a minefield, it was not yours to carry. It was not yours to fix. It was not a reflection of your worth or your goodness or your right to exist. Their anger was about their own inability to hold their emotions without exploding. It was about wounds they carried from their own childhoods, traumas they never processed, skills they never learned. It was about the stress of bills and work and marriage and the 1,000 small disappointments of adult life that they had no healthy way to metabolize. And you, small dependent unable to leave, you became the container for everything they could not contain within themselves. You were the emotional dumping ground, the safest target, the one who had to absorb the overflow because there was nowhere else for it to go. This does not excuse them. This does not make it acceptable. But it does mean something crucial. You were not the problem. You were the victim of their dysregulation, their lack of emotional skill, their choice, yes. Choice to unleash their pain on someone smaller and more vulnerable than themselves. Every time you tiptoed through the house, every time you made yourself small and silent and invisible, every time you swallowed your needs and apologized for existing, you were not managing your own emotions. You were managing theirs. You were doing the emotional labor that they should have been doing for themselves. You were parenting your own parents, regulating the adults who should have been regulating themselves. A child should never have to be that skilled at reading adult emotions. A child should never have to become an expert in de-escalation techniques. A child should be allowed to be loud and messy and needy and imperfect without fear of verbal annihilation. But you were not given that childhood. And so, you developed abilities that most people never acquire. You became fluent in a language most people do not even know exists. The subtle language of emotional undercurrents of tension, building beneath the surface of anger, gathering like storm clouds before the first crack of thunder. This skill is not nothing. Used in the right context, with the right boundaries, it becomes something valuable. Your ability to read a room, to sense what is unspoken, to pick up on dynamics that others miss, this makes you exceptional in certain spaces, in negotiations, in mediating conflicts, in understanding the hidden emotional architecture of groups and organizations, in being the kind of friend who notices when someone is struggling before they have to ask for help. You have a deep bone-level understanding of what it means to suffer in silence, and this gives you a capacity for compassion that is rare and precious. You see the invisible people because you know what it means to be invisible. You notice the ones who are working too hard to seem fine because you perfected that same performance. You extend kindness to the struggling because you remember when no one extended it to you. You also have something else, something that might be the most important gift of all. You know the value of peace, not the false peace that comes from suppression and silence and pretending everything is fine, but real peace, the kind that comes from safety, from voices that stay gentle, even in disagreement, from homes, where doors close softly and mistakes are met with patience instead of rage. You know what peace costs because you paid the price of its absence. You know what it means to live without it. And this knowledge makes you someone who will fight to create it in your own home, in your relationships, in the small corners of the world you touch. You will not take calm for granted. You will not treat gentleness as weakness. You will build something different than what you were given because you understand exactly what is at stake. The survival skills that once kept you safe in a dangerous home do not have to define you forever. But they also do not have to be discarded as if they were only scars. They can become something else, something chosen, something that serves you rather than controls you. The alarm in your head has been ringing for so long that you have forgotten what silence sounds like. Your nervous system has been in emergency mode for years, perhaps decades, running on high alert, even when there is no danger, even when you are alone in your apartment with the door locked and no one around to hurt you. The body does not know the difference between past and present. It only knows activation. It only knows threat. But here is what you need to understand. The alarm can be turned off, not all at once, not with a single decision or a moment of insight, but gradually, with patience, with the kind of repetitive practice that rewires neural pathways one connection at a time. The first step is recognition, learning to identify when you are experiencing an emotional flashback rather than responding to present reality. Your boss raises her voice during a meeting, and suddenly you are not a capable adult sitting in an office. You are 5 years old, standing in the kitchen, trying to make yourself invisible while the shouting fills the room. Your heart races. Your hands tremble. Your throat tightens. Your brain has time traveled, dragging your body with it, back to the moment when a raised voice meant danger, meant punishment, meant you were about to be hurt. In that moment, you need language. You need to be able to say to yourself, clearly and firmly, "This is a flashback. This is my childhood bleeding into my present. I am not 5 years old. I am not powerless. This person is not my parent. They cannot hurt me the way I was hurt then. I am safe. Right now in this moment, I am safe. The words matter. They create distance between the past and the present. They remind your nervous system that the threat is not current, that you have options now that you did not have, then that you can leave, can speak up, can protect yourself in ways that were impossible when you were small. But words alone are not enough, because the activation is not just in your mind, it is in your body, in your muscles that have been tensed for fight or flight for so many years that tension has become their default state. In your chest, where breath has been held shallow and high. In your stomach, where anxiety sits like a stone. In your hips and your jaw, and your shoulders, where fear has been stored, compressed, locked away, because there was never a safe place to release it. You need to let your body discharge the energy it has been holding. The adrenaline that flooded your system every time you heard footsteps approaching, every time a door slammed, every time the air shifted from calm to dangerous, that energy never had anywhere to go. You could not run. You could not fight back. You could not scream. And so, the energy stayed trapped, coiled in your muscles, waiting for a release that never came. Now you can give it that release. You can run until your legs burn and your lungs ache and the surplus adrenaline finally metabolizes out of your system. You can hit a punching bag, letting your fists connect with something solid, feeling the impact travel up your arms, releasing the rage you were never allowed to express. You can scream into a pillow, letting the sound tear out of your throat, giving voice to everything you swallowed. You can practice yoga or dance or any movement that allows your body to shake, to tremble, to discharge the freeze response that kept you paralyzed. This is not symbolic, this is physiological. Your nervous system needs to complete the defensive responses that were interrupted. It needs to finish the fight or flight that was never allowed to happen. And when you give it permission to move, to release, to express what was trapped, something shifts. The alarm grows quieter. The tension begins to ease. Your body starts to remember what safety feels like. But healing also requires something more difficult than physical release. It requires confronting the people who are still in your life, still using anger as a weapon, still expecting you to absorb their emotional chaos without complaint. If your parents are still alive, still volatile, still filling rooms with their rage, you have to make a choice. You can continue to manage their emotions at the expense of your own nervous system, or you can establish a boundary that feels at first like the cruelest thing you have ever done. When they begin to shout, you leave. You stand up, you speak clearly, you say, "I will talk to you" when you are calm, and then you walk out. You do not explain, you do not justify, you do not try to reason with someone whose rational brain has been hijacked by their amygdala, whose prefrontal cortex has gone offline, who is no longer capable of hearing you. This will feel wrong, it will feel disrespectful, abandoning, harsh. Your entire childhood taught you that your job is to stay, to absorb, to fix, to calm them down. But that was never your job. That was never a child's responsibility. And it is not your responsibility now. Protecting yourself is not cruelty. Walking away from verbal abuse is not abandonment. Refusing to be the container for someone else's unprocessed rage is not selfishness. It is survival. It is self-respect. It is the boundary you should have been taught to hold, but had to learn on your own. And then comes perhaps the most important healing of all learning, that conflict does not mean annihilation, that two people can disagree without one of them becoming a threat, that you can express anger, disappointment, frustration without the relationship ending, without love being withdrawn, without the world splitting open. You need corrective experiences. You need to have a small disagreement with someone safe, a partner, a close friend, someone who has earned your trust, and watch what happens. You state your needs. They listen. You express hurt. They apologize. You push back on something they said. They consider it rather than exploding. And slowly, through repetition, through evidence, your brain begins to update its programming. Conflict does not equal catastrophe. Anger can be expressed without destruction. You can be imperfect and still be loved. You grew up in a house where the walls shook, where every room held the memory of raised voices and slammed doors, where the foundation itself seemed unstable, built on fault lines that could shift without warning, where the ground beneath your feet never felt solid enough to trust. But you are not a child anymore. You are not standing in that house, bracing yourself against the next tremor, calculating which corner offers the most protection. You have left, and now you stand in open space with the authority to design something entirely different. You are the architect now. You hold the blueprints. You choose the materials. You can build a home where the loudest sound is laughter, where doors close gently because no one needs to punctuate their anger with violence, where silence is rest rather than punishment, where conflict is a conversation rather than a war, where raised voices are the exception that surprises rather than the norm that terrorizes. You can build a home where anger is allowed, but abuse is not, where people can be upset without being destructive, where mistakes are met with patience instead of rage, where children, if you choose to have them, never have to learn the terrible skill of walking on eggshells, never have to become experts in reading micro-expressions, never have to apologize for needing things or taking up space or being imperfectly human. You can build this, not because you have erased the past, not because the scars have vanished, not because your nervous system will never again mistake a raised voice for danger, but because you know with an intimacy that others can only imagine what it costs to live without peace. And that knowledge is its own form of power. You do not have to heal your parents. You do not have to make them understand what they did or apologize for what they cannot acknowledge. You do not have to earn your safety by pleasing everyone around you. The peace you are searching for does not live in their approval or their transformation or their belated recognition of your pain. It lives here, in the slow, deliberate work of teaching your body that the war is over, in the choice to surround yourself with people who know how to be angry without being cruel, in the radical act of building a life where you are allowed to exist without fear. Take a breath, a deep one. Let it fill your lungs completely. And as you exhale, release everything that was never yours to carry, the rage that belonged to them, the responsibility for their emotions, the belief that you caused the chaos or could have prevented it. You are safe now. The storm has passed, and what you build in the quiet after is entirely yours to create.